Good morning, 7th graders and Clinton. I hope you're having a great day. Happy Friday. Today's lesson is for May the 1st. I cannot believe we are in May already. It's crazy to think about it. And next week would have been Teachers Appreciation Week, so no presents. I'm just kidding. But I miss you guys lots and lots and lots. And today's shout out will go to Alyssa. Alyssa, this is your shout out today. I miss you and I wish I could give you a hug, but and I also appreciate the fact that you are doing your assignments and sending them to me. So today's lesson is gonna be covering pages 353 to 355. 353 to 355, and we are going to be talking. I'm going to pull out my notes a little bit more about the Cold War. We've been discussing the Cold War. Remember, the definition for a Cold War is a political rivalry and conflict of ideas that stopped short of an actual war between the United States and the Soviet Union, USSR. They also call it a war of words. We were trying to outdo each other. You know, we find that they're making a nuclear bomb. We're going to make a nuclear bomb. They're going to send someone to space, and we're going to send someone to space. They're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. It's kind of like who's going to be the better of the two. Very much competition, especially like during the Olympics. The other countries would compete, but when it was the United States and the Soviet Union, it was a little bit more rough. I mean, there was one year where the United States didn't go into the Olympics and they wanted to boycott the Olympics because the United States was there. It was a mess. We really didn't like one another. So, and then we talked about the opposing worldviews. In economics, you had, you know, and then politics, and then in religion. All right, so today we're going to continue the Cold War crises, and we're going to talk about the Berlin blockade, the Korean War, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. And some guiding questions are: what were the causes and consequences of major Cold War crises, and how did the rivalry between the superpowers affect the development of new military, nuclear, and space technology? And once again, we are on the development of the Cold War. So, after World War II, the occupation of Germany looked kind of like this. See all those things? So you have, they were split up into 4 parts. You had the Soviet Union over by Berlin, then you had the British zone, the French zone, and the US zone. Since the British and the French were on the American side, well, Russia was on the American side, but since they both believed the same way as far as democracy is concerned, that's considered just one. So they kind of like merged together. So even though they had their own zones, they kind of were like together. And then also in Berlin, it was also split up that way too, with the 3, French, British, and the US, and then you had the Russia side of it, or the Soviet Union side, the communist side of Berlin, and then they also, the 3 merged together. Does that make sense? So, before I go on and talk about it, but I want to give you a definition of Berlin blockade. This is where the Soviets blocking of all traffic through East Germany into West Germany. It ended due to a massive airlift of supplies by the United States and Britain. I love this story. Remember, we had a lot of things that happened after the World War II, and we as Americans, or the United States, was trying to help rebuild all these other countries. Well, the first conflict of this Cold War happened in Germany. Talked about the 4 sections, and they did this with Berlin. West Germany was the Federal Republic of Germany. That's what you called it okay? But East Germany was called the German Democratic Republic. So you had the communist side, the Soviet Union controlled, and then you have the free enterprise, okay, or capitalism, democracy. All right, in 1948, this is when the Soviets decided to block all traffic to the Allies into West Berlin. And this was called the Berlin Blockade. I already gave you the definition for this. After World War II, there weren't many supplies for the Germans, so they had to have supplies given from other countries to help them. They needed the supplies for survival. We need food for survival, right? We need clothing, we need things, but basically food. So Americans, the British, the French, the Canadians, the Australians, New Zealand, and South African Air Force helped to provide these supplies into West Germany. They provided the people, this is interesting, with 8,893 tons of necessities that they needed. So this meant that every 90 seconds, 24 hours a day, a cargo plane landed or dropped food supplies into West Berlin. So they dropped coal for fuel and they dropped food. One pilot, this is really cute, saw children standing there, so he would take these little chocolates and put little parachutes, and he would drop these chocolates for these children to come and get it. He did this more times, and he got really, really popular doing it, and then they got to where the German children were asking for more, so he went, and then in America, they told children to donate candy for these children of Berlin. And so I have some pictures I wanted to show you of this. This is kind of so sweet. I love hearing stories, especially when you you just get over a war and you're fighting. So here it is. Here's the picture, a picture of them with the cargo of supplies. And this wasn't only just America, it was all these other countries that I mentioned. And so they would take these cargo planes and the people would sit there and wait, and they would drop it into Berlin. There's all these other planes in line getting ready to go. I just love this, it's so cool. And then you have these kids that would donate candy. And I don't know if you could see it, I know the light's kind of shining. I forgot to close the window today. So here's a picture of them putting up a wall in Berlin to separate East Germany and West Germany. There's a movie that I would have shown in class, but I didn't get to because of course the coronavirus and the quarantine. But it's called Night Crossing, and it's an old, I think it was made like in the 70s or early 80s, and it's about a family. Walt Disney produces it, and it's about a family who builds an air balloon so that because they were living in East Berlin or East Germany, and they wanted to cross the border into West Germany, and you weren't allowed to do that. You could lose your life. They had, you know, if you touched the wall, they had machine guns that would go off and kill people. People from West Berlin didn't always go over because they had the chance of never being able to go back. But a lot of times if you had a passport, people from West Berlin could go into East Berlin and then go back. But if you were from East Berlin, you couldn't at all. So the German children called this plane that dropped the candy the Raisin Bomber. So that's kind of cute. These airlifted supplies was a huge success because it brought needed goods for the people and prevented another war from happening. So in 1949, the blockade was lifted. That's the first thing that happened in the Cold War. The second thing, well, this isn't really this second thing, but the Berlin Wall, I showed you a picture of it, It was built in 1961, and it divided East and West Germany for nearly 3 decades. So like I said, it total war. You could not get from one side to the other without special permission, and most of the time people didn't want to go into East Berlin because you had the chance that you would never make it back. And you know, West Berlin was freedom. There was an ice skater, and her name was Katharina Witt, and she was an Olympic ice skater for East Germany, yes. And so she was great, but her parents never got to see her perform live or perform on TV, and until they lifted, and they, you know, the wall was lifted. And so it was kind of sad to hear that story too. You hear a lot of stories about people that were in bondage that way. So the movie was called Night Crossing, and like I said, Disney performs it. If you go on Amazon Prime, maybe you can rent it and watch it as a family. It's an interesting story, and it's kind of like, you know. I also have it in my schoolroom at school, so I guess you can see if you can borrow it, but it'd be easy to just get it, and so wish I could show it to you. It was a great movie. So the second thing that happened during the Cold War was the Korean War, okay? And this is when communism took a foothold in the northern part of Korea. I'm going to show you another map before I continue. Here, see that right there? See how close Korea is to Russia and to China? Very close, especially northern Korea, okay? So, I always do this. I always close out my notes when I show you another picture. Okay, so, where to go, where to go, where to go? Okay, so, the Soviet Union gained control after World War II and built a strong military to conquer North Korea, or all of Korea. They wanted all of Korea. They had North Korea, but they wanted all of Korea. And so in your book, there's a picture of the 38th parallel. This is kind of like the Berlin Wall that they did. They had an invisible line right there. That was the 38th parallel. And that was dividing North Korea and South Korea. So you have North Korea, which is communist control, South Korea, which is more freedom, okay? So it's the 38th parallel is the latitude used to divide Korea into North and South. And you remember this guy, this hero of World War II, General MacArthur, okay? He's gonna have a key role in helping get Korea back, or save North Korea from communist control. Oops, I just lost my notes. There they went. Hold on 1 second. Let me go back. So he's gonna help this. He's gonna help South Korea, and they're gonna try to conquer North Korea, or they're gonna try to make it so that it could be free too. So in June of 1959, North Korea invaded South Korea, and this sparked the Korean War. And the Korean War has a nickname called the Forgotten War. Not a lot of people talk about it. They forget that it actually happened. General MacArthur was sent to lead the men in this war, and they were doing well. They had a surprise attack on Ikon. So I'm going to show you a picture of where that is. That's the parallel. Here we go. Right there. And so this is the place where the South Korean city that was the site of a daring attack by UN force composed of American and South Korean troops. Now remember, it's not the United States anymore. We're part of the UN. So the UN is sending MacArthur out, and he's going to help lead the troops. Harry Truman was the president during this time, and he was the one who ordered him to go. Now, it was, so the city, Icon, was near water, so MacArthur's men landed by boat transportation. They didn't come in and fly, they landed, and this was a successful surprise attack that helped the advancement of, This was a successful surprise attack that pushed Korea's military further north. So MacArthur and his men were going into North Korea to help conquer it and take it over so that communism would no longer be part of North Korea and Korea could be saved. But there was a thing that happened that kind of changed everything. This is when China and their military came in to help the North Koreans, and they pushed General MacArthur and his men back into South Korea. After all that work, we had the Chinese coming, because remember, China was communist. So of course, they're gonna help North Korea because they want, China's right there, Soviet Union's right there, and they're gonna come in and help. Okay, and President Truman decided he wanted to be careful with this war because now China was involved, and he was like, I don't want to start another World War III. So he was very careful at what he told MacArthur to do. The fighting continued until 1953 with neither side winning, and so they agreed, both sides agreed with an armistice. That meant that no one was claiming victory. They were just gonna agree not to fight, and then everything remained the same. North Korea remained communist control, South Korea was free. Communism had been contained though, but at a very high cost. So what I mean by communism being contained is that North Korea did not come in and capture South Korea and all of Korea was communist. No, it just remained the same, but it was still contained. So you can call it a victory if you wanted to, but not so much. It wasn't an ideal thing. It wasn't like when we went to World War II and whoa, we're the winners, okay? It was a little bit different than that. Nearly 40,000 American soldiers died in action and tens of thousands were wounded. And Korea is still divided today, and we hear a lot about, the leader of Korea, and it's just really sad. And then the third thing that happened during the Cold War was the Cuban Missile Crisis. So if you look on your map, if you know where Cuba is, or anything about Cuba, you'll see that Cuba is so close to the United States, right there by Florida. It's about 30 miles away from Florida. So you can bet Cuba is communist, and you can bet that the United States is going to have their eye on Cuba because it's kind of like a scary thing because they're right there. Here was the president. President John F. Kennedy was the president during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And this man, Fidel Castro, was the leader or the dictator of Cuba. And you had Nikita Khrushchev, who was the president of Russia, or the leader of Russia. So what happened one time was a spy plane went over Cuba and found that they had missiles there. So if you want to pause, you can't really see, it's not that great, but you have these pictures, and he saw all these missiles. Here's, I'm going to show you that later when we talk about the spy plane, because it's kind of interesting there. Okay, so, oops, we already talked about that. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so we have, I told you, Nikita Khrushchev was the leader of the Soviet Union, and Cuba had been a communist country since 1959, okay? So, like I said, Cuba was about 30 miles away from Florida, and in October of 1962, a spy plane was discovered all the missiles in Cuba. The reason why they're so worried is because nuclear bombs can easily be put into these missiles and they could just shoot them off. And since Cuba is so close to the United States, they were kind of worried, and so they're watching people, and this made a lot of people in America nervous. They didn't want to have a start. They didn't want to start another war, you know, to deal with this. So the Soviet commander in Cuba had shot down a spy plane. An American U-2 spy plane was shot it down and killed an American pilot. And so this caused tensions to rise between the two countries, of course. I'm going to show you some things. I'm going to show you these pictures, and I'm going to describe a little bit about these spy planes that these pilots went on. It was crazy. I mean, I think I would probably get airsick if I was in. First of all, they're the coolest looking things here. So this is called a U-2 spy plane. And they could get up to about 70,000 feet in altitude, which is more than half of a passenger. If you've ever flown on a plane before, we don't get up to 70,000 feet. That's almost near space, okay? So you have these, so cool, these pictures, all right? And this is what they were in. They were in a plane like this. They were like cramped up in that plane. First of all, air sickness, claustrophobia, and heights, not, you have to be very, very, almost like an astronaut. They wore suits, pressurized suits, like an astronaut would wear, because they were basically up into space. And then here's a picture of them. Here's a picture of the inside of a U-2. So when they were going to land, let me show you this picture and I'll describe what that is. See that car that's right behind? Can you see the car that's right behind the plane? Yeah, there he is. Okay. These planes, this is incredible. Let's see. Gotta find my notes here. So they can fly higher than the radars can detect. That's how high they can get. And during the landing, a driver, I showed you that picture, is behind the plane. He's chasing the plane to help it touch down. Because when the pilot lands, he lands on the center wheels, and they're like bicycle wheels in the middle. Well, he's landing with 0% visibility. He can't see what he's doing, so he needs that car to guide him. The pilot on the land, this pilot that helps him land, this is like the fastest, he can drive the fastest car in the world, and he's getting there to help land this U-2 plane, this spy plane. The pilot has to land, like I said. So going back, so now you can understand, getting shot down, or this U-2 plane being shot down, was something that was like, whoa, what happened here? And so the missiles that shot down the spy plane could easily attack American cities. So President Kennedy and his advisors met for several days. They're trying to figure out a plan, like, okay, since they shot down the spy plane, now what are we going to do? Because they could shoot Florida, Disneyland, target a lot of people in the United States. So he demanded that the Soviets remove the missiles in Cuba. And he also ordered a blockade of Cuba, which didn't allow Soviet ships with weapons reach Cuba. So they had control over the sea. And he would not remove the blockade until all the missiles were removed from Cuba. So you better get rid of these missiles or else. So secret negotiations took place between the two countries, the Soviet Union and Americans, President Kennedy. And so what they did, the Soviets said, okay, we'll take the missiles from Cuba if you take your missiles from Turkey. So you see where that little thing is? So the United States had missiles in Turkey that was close to Russia. Well, Russia's like, well, wait, you know, if you take yours, then you have to remove. So do you think they're going to agree to this plan? Yes, they're both going to say, okay. So Cuba removed their missiles and United States removed their missiles, and war, once again, was avoided. A lot of info there, right? So, pretty interesting, the 3 things that we talked about today. So the big picture. The conflicts between the U.S. and the USSR included the Berlin blockade, the Korean War, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. And then, although the United States and the USSR avoided a war between themselves, tensions between the 2 superpowers were still strong. It's going to last for a while. An interesting fact for you today is that children's modeling clay invented in 1956 was originally used to remove stains from walls. Crazy to think about that. So if you get a chance, maybe that you're home, maybe you can have your parents Amazon Prime that movie. It's called Night Crossings. It's an old movie. Disney put it out, and it's really good. I know that they remade the movie, Germany did, but the remake is rated R, and I haven't seen it, and I don't think it's, I don't know. It's subtitled. So go back to the original one, and it tells a little bit about the family and what it was like living in East Berlin. Very sad. Makes you thankful that we're here in a free country. All right? So, have a good weekend. I love you, and I'm so thankful for you, and I hope you make great choices.